So it's a great pleasure to introduce our first panel now, and I'll invite our panelists to come join us at the podium here. So first of all, we have Richard Bruton, who is a research economist and former government minister and well known to us all, and thank you very much indeed for being with us, Richard. We have Dr. Ona Lee Layma, who is Deputy Director of the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology here in the University of Galway. And we have Camille Loftess, who is Head of Advocacy and Public Affairs with Aid Action Ireland. She's a former Special Advisor to Government Ministers in the Department of Health and the Department of Children, where she had the particular misfortune to work with me. So you're very welcome indeed. So the plan is that we would ask each of you, or invite each of you, to make a short contribution, no more than 5 minutes, or maybe even a little shorter, so that we leave ourselves some time for discussion. So I'm going to look in your direction first, Richard. Maybe just a short input from your perspective on what you've heard or whatever else perspective you want to bring.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is transformative change is very hard, and I was Minister for Climate, and that gives you the sort of thing that John was talking about, changing our system of pensions. It's extremely hard, and I think it's not enough to show there's a burning platform, as they say. You have to have a compelling story that engages people, and to some extent, the slides that John put up there about the 5 to 1 going to 2.5 to 1 over a 60-year period. I think that's too dry and it doesn't connect with a lot of people. There's an interesting book called The Political Brain about how people decide on their politics. And I suppose there's 3 key elements. Are they on my side? It's the first test. Do they have the cojones to do anything about it? And the third test is all that stuff that we call policy and evidence and whatnot. And if you aren't connecting at this sense that they are on my side, you are really up against it. And particularly in a more populist world where there's an anti-elite, where it's very easy to say, well, I didn't cause this problem. It wasn't me, sir. So I think you have to think differently about those sort of major changes. I think in this context of pensions, the greatest human achievement is that we've moved to living longer. Like I'm as old, I'd say I'm a good deal older than John, sadly to say. But when pensions were around, when I was starting into the workforce, I think the retirement age was about 70 and your life expectancy was 72. Now the retirement age is 66 and our life expectancy is 86. We have not changed the fundamental way we think about aging to match that absolutely dramatic change. And I think John adverted to it in the way we the older generation, are sitting on massive housing property, way beyond our needs, but we have not thought to find a way of how you release the 5-bedroom house that I live in for the people who are trying to family form. Nor have we thought about, how do you prepare someone for retirement way before they reach the age when they should be thinking about it, how they're going to continue to be engaged. The relationship, I think, between work and non-work is dramatically changing. And the idea that at 66 you're compelled to retire is crazy. 50% of people want to work beyond their contracted date. And we're not creating the space for that. We're not creating the space for activities that would engage them. So I think you have to put this in a much wider context. Of course there's costs, but there has to be benefits that people will see as well. And the other thing I would say, and it's more as an economist, I think deeper need to think about pulling together a decision made annually about the rate of pension. You should be looking at the net present value of that decision, because it's enormous. You increase by 5% with your aging population. So you should be looking at these 3 things together. So a politician can't walk into the law and say, I'm increasing by 20 euros and pretend that the cost of that is 100 million, whatever it is. The reality is, unless you're increasing the PRSI at the same date at time, unless you're looking at the age at which you reach pension, the cost of that is truly enormous. And I don't think that's ever presented in that way. And as a result, politicians who want to be seen to be on people's side will make a very soft decision. And you have to create a framework where those longer term implications are factored in.
Can I interrupt you, Richard, at this point? What do you think then we could do better in terms of communication? I mean, clearly you're trying to give a very, very difficult message in this space, and John has struggled obviously with the same issue. Is there something we can do to communicate better, or is it simply a matter of communication or more than that?
I think the story is we are living longer. We can look forward to 20 years after we retire. That is, there's huge opportunities for people who have reached that point to be continuing to contribute to society, but we need to change a number of things to facilitate that. One is the pension age and the age. Another is, that you can work productively beyond your retirement age and you get benefit from that. Another is that you can engage in things that are of use to society, and I think one of the speakers, Mike, talked about the state needs to look differently at roles that people can play. I chair Social Enterprise Republic of Ireland, and there's people adding extraordinary positive value, but the state framework to try to release that energy, a lot of them coming from retired people, is simply, it doesn't fit. We haven't thought through that. So I think you've to get a bigger picture where people who are being asked to change from 66 to 67 to 68 see that that's in the context of these other things that will happen, that will empower me to have a more positive aging period. I think that's
great. Thanks so much. I'm going to move to Camille next. So from your perspective, and you've worn different hats, so I'm sure you'll have different perspectives to offer on this.
I'm getting closer to pension age too. I broadly have 2 points I want to make. One which is about communications, and the other one is what I've shorthanded as getting your ducks in a row. And I think the two feed into each other. Like, I would point out first, I agree with Richard, the pensions challenge is a success story. It's because we live longer. And actually, we've done really well in Ireland in terms of increasing life expectancy in comparison to other rich countries. And it's also a success story in that women no longer have to bear 8 children, right? We are having smaller families now. Those are two really significant markers of success and development in an economy. And yet, whenever we talk about this issue, what we do is we frame it as a problem of old age dependency. Old age people are going to take all of your money and stop your quality of life because they've had the temerity to live longer. So that's one thing. That's the first thing I would do, is I would reframe the way we're talking about this issue. The other thing I think is, more broadly, is we have to become much, much better about communicating right from the start of the policy design process with each other, between government and citizenry, I'm old enough to have participated in social partnership. One of the big benefits of that was that you got an understanding of how different sectors in society understood the issue. I understood how employers felt about it. I understood how trade unions felt about it. I could sit down and talk with civil servants who would say to me, well, Camille, we'd object to what you're trying to do, but we have to get over this problem, and this problem. How will we do that? And we could work together to do it. We don't do that anymore. That was one of the big losses, I think, out of the crash, is that we stopped having those kind of conversations. John mentioned that politicians were taken by surprise when pensioners got out and protested about the change in ages. They should not have been taken by surprise. And we have increasing indications of the political system and decision-making system being taken by surprise by things they ought to have known about. In a country as small as this, that has a highly representative system of democracy, with extensive civic society organisation, We should not be being caught on the hop by developments like this. We should not be caught on the hop by people rioting on O'Connell Street. We should not be caught on the hop by energy protests. We should not have a referendum put to the people, defeated by the biggest majority that in any constitutional change in the history of the state, which was supported by all bar one of the political parties in the Dáil and pretty much every social partner out there. Something has gone fundamentally wrong with our system of communication, right? Really fundamentally wrong there. I don't have all the answers to that, right? I do think my own sector has to be held accountable in that regard too, because we are supposed to be, part of what we're supposed to be doing is giving effect to those voices and bringing those up to decision makers. And I think that we have lost, and I think also through the delay or the ending of social partnership, I think we've lost some capacity in that regard. But like, for example, when John is talking about consulting with trade unions, most people aren't members of trade unions anymore. Unless you're in the public sector and you're already covered by a pension, you're not really represented by the unions. You know, they're representing only a small minority of the population. So right the way through the process, from understanding the problem in the first place, understanding the perspective of different actors in society, we need to get much better about communicating on these things. So people understand what the problem is and understand what the options are. The other thing I'll say is about getting ducks in a row. If I learned anything from my period of time as an advisor, is like, don't move unless you've got all the supportive infrastructure, unless you've got all the implementation structure ready to go, okay? So we raised the pension age to 66 in 2014. It was last December before we raised contractual retirement age. Nearly 10 years on before we managed to address that problem. It's still extraordinarily difficult for people who want to stay and work after 66 to do so. Like, there's lots of things that we could have done to sell a better story around pensions change. We have oodles of recommendations around pension benchmarking. Government said no. So we're asking workers now, young workers, to compulsorily contribute to a pension fund without knowing what they'll get from the state pension when they retire. And while we have a tax relief system that says to the people who are least likely to need an incentive, you get 40% relief, and the people who are most likely to need an incentive, you get half that. So line up our ducks in a row and have a good story to tell to people if you're going to try and make strategic change. Because I think for a lot of the time what it feels like is that government does the bits that suits it and doesn't do the bits that citizens also want to see change on.
Okay, Camille, thank you very much. I'll pause you there. Hopefully we'll come back to some of those points. Áine, you've been involved in this area for a considerable period of time, and I know your research covers ageing and carers and so on. So your perspective, if you could.
Okay. So I'd like to, I've been researching in this area for, first of women and pensions for about 15 years, and then on the implications of extended working life, which was the initial policy proposal, was to just raise state pension age to first 66, which happened, and then 67. So that was a very, in my view, a very lazy policy, and I don't see it as a failure of democracy that people came out to protest in the Stop 67 campaign. It was a peaceful protest. It was supported by young people as well as old people. So I don't like this intergenerational pitting one generation against the other either, because there are a lot of transfers from older people, from parents to children as well. But what I want to highlight here is coming from my own research and other international research that I've been involved in. So the position of people who still need to be protected, and their inequalities and disadvantages not deepened by any future pension reform. And I approve of a lot of the measures brought in by the Pension Commission when they did actually listen to people. For example, the protection for carers, family carers, which was important. But I also want to talk about people in physically demanding work. So I've done a number of studies where, and I want to say to Liz and Caroline as well, it depends on what kind of research evidence you're looking at. It's not just statistics and quantitative surveys. if you talk to people and get their lived experience, you see that, say, for example, the carers, many of them have injured hips, backs, necks from their work, and they can't possibly work past even traditional state pension age, not to mind working to 67. So that's one group that I'd like to see protected in future pension reforms. And the next group, well, there's women who tend to be concentrated in low-paid work, and the other group I'm thinking of are precarious workers, so people in either 0 hours contracts or delivery workers, those kind of workers who can't build up or find it very difficult to build up these periods of pension coverage. So those are the kind of policies I think that should be. I'm looking to the future now, rather than, I have spoken about the pension reforms, which I think were a really good compromise. Okay.
Are we making any big mistakes in this area? I mean, are we just trying to do the right thing and not quite getting there, or are we missing something big?
I think there just need to be, policies need to be more flexible, and it's been a step in the right direction to not to just increase state pension age in a blanket way, in one size fits all. That was just wrong.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is because there were protests to raising the pension age, politicians don't want to touch this area at all now. It's in third rail territory. It's difficult. It's dangerous. It's awkward, and that is problematic. And I think there is a risk whereby you see auto-enrollment's an accomplishment. Don't get me wrong, but where it feels like it's your job now to look after your pension, because we find this difficult. These are difficult decisions. We don't want to make them. We're not going to make them. You invest in your pension. Right? Without any of the support infrastructure that was recommended in terms of that. And that, I think, does undermine trust in government. That's the kind of thing that makes you sort of think, well, they're not actually looking out for us. Somebody was talking about a slogan in the election campaign which said, make government pay, and forgetting that it's us, that's us paying, right? But it helps to feed that disjuncture, I think.
Absolutely. John, any thoughts on what you've heard and the response that you'd like to make?
A couple of things. I was talking about communications first. I don't gainsay any of the stuff about communications, and it's the whole policy framework about the narrative policy framework for, it's about telling stories and getting people on board. I think it's also a fact that people, and I forget the technical term for it, but people have a very poor appreciation of large numbers and time. So trying to communicate something that intuitively people can't grasp anyway is a very difficult thing to do. And I think that's where you need leadership rather than followership. And I think an institutional challenge for society is how do you create space for leadership? Because some of the decisions are hard decisions that cannot be sold, no matter how hard you try to sell them. It is, and the medicine will be good for you. Well, I don't want the medicine phase. And when you talk about intergenerational strife and that, I wouldn't be trying to present that at all. But I think there has to be a realization that if we're in a society, it's a cost on all of us. And I cannot keep my benefit as an older person, which I am now and which I'm going to be in the future, at the expense of younger people. I just cannot. It would be morally corrupt. It'd be morally wrong. And we have to face up to that. And the consequences on how do we deal with it in terms of the choices. Do we increase taxes and PRSI contributions? Which is the approach the government is taking. And that's one approach, and it might be the right approach. Or are there other alternatives? And I don't see, for example, auto-enrollment as putting the problem on people to pay. I mean, PRSI and taxes are paid by people anyway. So if you say the state should fix it, well, the state, it's the same money. It's being done in a different way. Now, I can make the argument that the argument is made, for example, on auto-enrollment. We shouldn't have had auto-enrollment. We should just have increased PRSI and increased pension rates and done what Richard said, which is do an actuarial evaluation every year and do all of that. And they're choices. But ultimately, the choice is made to do things the way we are. And, there's no right answer in this, and there's no perfect solution. But I do think the problem is bigger than just the problem I'm raising about leadership rather than followership in a fragmented polity. Is bigger than just pensions, and pensions is the point where it comes to crux. On the point about politicians being surprised, I think the reason politicians were surprised on that particular one is that the law was passed in 2011 and the row started in 2020.
Nobody knew.
So it had been internalised. It was a done deal. It was going to happen. It wasn't in any, and actually it wasn't in any manifestos or any discussions pre the election. It emerged during the election. So it wasn't a topic. It wasn't an issue going into the election. And even as I said, the MRBI culture, it wasn't really a huge issue for a lot of people. It was an issue for a very concentrated group. And that's the stone and the lever.
The only thing I'd say, John, is it was an issue. It wasn't an issue for many people because all of the parties had already said, "No, we're not going to do this." So they had neutered it as an issue. Right?
I don't know if that's true. Actually, I don't know if that's true because I read all the manifestos.
Let's finish with the fight.
The only thing I would say is consultation where you bring in, the usual suspects or. I don't think that will work in this more politicised environment where there's such a gulf between voters and electors. I think the Citizens' Assembly, leading to the Oireachtas passing of a number of, Climate Change Act, the referendum, that's a model that did work. And one of the advantages of that, it puts lead in the pencil of leaders, as you say. Whereas, did your consultation put lead in the pencil of leaders to face down? That's what I'd worry.
Well, there was a Citizen Assembly on pensions, and the Citizen Assembly, I think, was 98% favoured the increase in the pension age.
But I think,
so, and that was...
But the other thing that I found, just as an aside, in our party, I established what we called a policy lab, and it involved consultation with people who were working at the cold face and people who are, if you like, clients. And it was amazing the extent to which people never felt they'd been asked their opinion before. And that I think that sort of a framework is important, as well as, the 100 citizens. I think you have to build momentum for change in these different areas.
The other thing is I think people had felt the impact of the first state pension age, and they could see the people I'm talking about who, were very badly off and very badly affected. So I'm sure that happens.
We could continue this conversation for the rest of the day. Unfortunately, we have to call a halt there. Thank you very much indeed. Could I thank Richard?